The radio crackled with static and desperation. "Overlord, this is Neptune 6. We are Winchester on ammo and taking heavy fire from the compound. Where the hell is our air support?" Staff Sergeant Marcus Rivera pressed his back against the crumbling concrete wall, feeling the vibrations of enemy rounds punching through the structure behind him. His SEAL team had been pinned down for 47 minutes in what was supposed to be a 15-minute extraction. The mission had gone sideways the moment they'd breached the terrorist compound in the mountains of Afghanistan. Neptune 6, Overlord. Ghost Rider is RTB due to mechanical failure. Nearest CAS is 40 mics out. The voice from command carried the weight of a death sentence. 40 minutes might as well have been 40 hours. Rivera could hear his teams breathing over the comm, sharp and controlled, but edged with the knowledge that their guardian angel had just vanished into the night sky. "Sir," whispered Petty Officer Thompson, blood seeping through his sleeve, "we've got movement on the north wall. They're massing for another push." Through his night vision, Rivera counted at least 30 insurgents moving through the shadows, their AK-47s glinting in the green-tinted darkness. The compound stretched across a valley floor, surrounded by rocky outcroppings that provided perfect cover for the enemy. They'd walked into a perfectly orchestrated trap. The silence that followed was deafening. No engine noise, no friendly voices on the radio, just the distant sound of boots on gravel and the metallic click of weapons being readied. Rivera closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of command pressing down on his shoulders like a physical force. 6 men under his command. 6 families back home who trusted him to bring their sons and fathers back alive. Then, cutting through the silence like a blade, came the unmistakable sound that changed everything. A low, rumbling growl that seemed to emerge from the very mountains themselves. The insurgents froze, their heads tilting skyward in confusion and growing fear. Rivera had heard that sound before during his deployment in Iraq, but it couldn't be possible. Not here. Not now. The sky above the compound began to vibrate with a mechanical heartbeat that grew stronger with each passing second. Somewhere in the darkness, an angel of death was awakening, and the night was about to become very different for everyone trapped in that valley. Major Kalen, Banshee, Thorne felt the AC-130 Ghost Rider respond to her touch like a living thing. The massive gunship rolled into a slow left bank, its 4 turboprop engines singing their deadly lullaby as she positioned the aircraft in a perfect orbit around the target below. In the red-lit cockpit, her face was a mask of concentration, her green eyes reflecting the soft glow of the instruments that had become as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. "Sensor operator has eyes on multiple hostiles," came the voice of Technical Sergeant Rodriguez from the booth behind her. "Counting 30 enemy personnel in the open. Friendlies are marked with strobes in the southeast corner of the compound." The AC-130's sophisticated sensors painted a crystal-clear picture of the battlefield below, distinguishing between the heat signatures of the trapped SEALs and their attackers with surgical precision. Banshee's hands moved across the controls with practiced efficiency, adjusting altitude and airspeed to maintain the perfect firing position. The gunship's orbit was a dance of death that she performed hundreds of times, but tonight felt different. The radio chatter from the ground carried an edge of desperation that reminded her why she'd chosen this path, why she'd fought through years of skepticism and subtle dismissal to earn her place in the pilot's seat of America's most feared close air support platform. "Spooky 7-7, this is Neptune 6, came the voice from below, tight with controlled panic. "We are in immediate need of danger close fire support. Enemy is preparing to overrun our position." Rivera's voice carried across the radio waves, reaching her through the static and distance like a prayer whispered into the darkness. She keyed her mic, her voice calm and professional despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Neptune 6, Spooky 7-7, I have your position marked. Stand by for immediate fire support." The words carried a weight that she felt in her chest, the responsibility of 6 lives hanging in the balance below. But there was something else in her voice, something that the men on the ground couldn't yet identify, a quiet confidence that spoke of competence earned through fire and blood. Copy spooky. We're ready to paint targets. Rivera's relief was palpable even through the radio static. Air support had arrived, and with it, hope that they might see another sunrise. But neither he nor his team knew that their salvation had arrived in the form of a pilot who'd been written off, overlooked, and underestimated by almost everyone she'd ever served with. They were about to witness something extraordinary. The insurgents below continued their advance, unaware that death was circling overhead at 8,000 feet, piloted by a woman who'd been forged in the crucible of military aviation and tempered by years of proving herself in a world that had never wanted her there. The night sky held its breath, waiting for the storm that was about to break. In the Tactical Operations Center back at Bagram Airfield, Colonel James Hartley stared at the radio with disbelief etched across his weathered face. He'd been monitoring the emergency frequency when the call came through, and the call sign made him pause. Spooky 77, that's Thorne's bird. His aide, Lieutenant Morrison, looked up from his computer terminal with confusion written across his young features. Sir, I thought Major Thorne was grounded pending review of the friendly fire incident. Morrison's voice carried the careful neutrality of a junior officer navigating dangerous waters. The incident he referenced had been the talk of the base for weeks, a controversy that had threatened to end Banshee's career before it had truly begun. Hartley's jaw tightened as he remembered the investigation. 3 weeks ago, during a close air support mission over Helmand Province, Thorne had been accused of firing too close to friendly positions, allegedly putting an army patrol at risk. The incident had been blown out of proportion by officers who'd been looking for any excuse to question her capabilities. What they'd ignored was that her precise fire had saved that patrol from being overrun, eliminating insurgents who'd been positioning themselves to launch a devastating ambush. The review board cleared her yesterday, Hartley replied, his voice carrying a mixture of satisfaction and vindication. Seems like someone forgot to update the duty roster. But he knew better. The grounding had been political, not tactical. Too many old guard officers still believed that the cockpit of a gunship was no place for a woman, regardless of her qualifications or track record. The radio crackled again with Rivera's voice. Spooky 77, we have multiple targets massing on the north wall. Request immediate suppression. The urgency was unmistakable. This wasn't a training exercise or a routine patrol. This was life and death unfolding in real time, and the only thing standing between those SEALs and annihilation was a pilot who'd been fighting for respect since the day she'd earned her wings. Roger, Neptune 6. Beginning gun run now. Banshee's voice came through clear and steady, professional in a way that made Hartley's chest swell with pride. He'd been the one to recommend her for AC-130 training, fighting against a wall of bureaucratic resistance and old-fashioned prejudice. Tonight, his faith in her abilities was about to be tested in the most unforgiving arena possible. Morrison leaned forward in his chair, studying the tactical display that showed the AC-130's position relative to the ground team. Colonel, she's awfully close to the friendlies. If she misses... He didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone in the room knew what happened when a 105 howitzer round landed in the wrong place. She won't miss, Hartley said quietly, his voice carrying the absolute certainty of a man who'd seen Thorne's work firsthand. Watch and learn, Lieutenant. You're about to see why she earned that call sign. 8,000 feet above the compound, Banshee's world had narrowed to the green glow of her displays and the steady rhythm of her breathing. The AC-130 Ghostwriter was more than just an aircraft. It was a flying fortress bristling with enough firepower to level city blocks. The 25 Gatling gun, the 40 Bofors cannon, and the massive 105 howitzer all awaited her command, precision instruments of destruction that required surgical skill to employ effectively. Sensor, I need continuous updates on friendly positions, she called to Rodriguez. her voice cutting through the controlled chaos of the weapon system's booth. The AC-130's crew worked in perfect synchronization, each member a vital component in the killing machine that orbited the battlefield below. But ultimate responsibility rested with her, the pilot who would guide their weapons to their targets while ensuring that not a single round endangered the men they'd come to save. Roger, pilot. Friendlies are stationary in the southeast bunker, multiple hostiles advancing from the north, approximately 75 meters from friendly position. Rodriguez's voice was clinical, professional, but Banshee could hear the underlying tension. They all knew how quickly things could go wrong in the darkness, how easily victory could turn to tragedy with one miscalculated shot. The insurgents below had no idea what was bearing down on them. They moved with the confidence of hunters who believed their prey was trapped and helpless. Their leaders shouted commands in Pashto, coordinating the final assault that would eliminate the American soldiers who dared to penetrate their stronghold. They'd fought against coalition forces for years, and they knew that night belonged to those who understood the mountains and valleys of their homeland. What they didn't know was that high above them, a woman who'd been dismissed and underestimated by her own military was about to demonstrate why respect wasn't given. It was earned, one perfectly placed round at a time. Banshee's fingers found the weapon selector switch, her mind calculating angles, distances, and trajectories with the mathematical precision that had made her legendary among those who truly understood her capabilities. The AC-130 continued its deadly circle, a mechanical vulture waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Below, the insurgents raised their weapons, preparing to deliver what they believed would be the killing blow. Above, Banshee's hand moved to the trigger, ready to show them how wrong they were about who held the advantage in this deadly game of chess played across the Afghan mountains. All stations, this is Spooky 7-7, commencing engagement. The words hung in the air like a promise and a threat, carrying with them the weight of everything that was about to unfold in the darkness below. Ghost Rider 6, this is Neptune 6, multiple tangos moving to flank our position from the west. Rivera's voice carried the strain of a man watching his tactical situation deteriorate by the second. Through his night vision, he could see the insurgents using the natural terrain to their advantage, flowing like water through the rocky outcroppings that surrounded the compound. They moved with the confidence of men fighting on familiar ground, their tactics honed by years of warfare against foreign invaders. Banshee processed the information instantly, her mind creating a three-dimensional picture of the battlefield that existed as much in her consciousness as on any computer screen. The AC-130's advanced targeting systems painted the enemy movements in stark relief, but it was her intuition, her understanding of how battles flowed and evolved, that would determine the success or failure of the mission unfolding below. Copy Neptune 6. I have eyes on the flanking element, 20+ hostiles moving through the eastern ravine. Her voice remained steady, professional, giving no hint of the complex calculations racing through her mind. Wind speed, target velocity, friendly positions, ammunition conservation. Every variable had to be weighed and balanced in the space between heartbeats. The insurgents had chosen their battlefield well. The compound sat in a natural bowl, surrounded by rocky walls that channeled any ground assault into predictable lanes of approach. It should have been a perfect defensive position for the SEALs, but the enemy had turned the terrain against them, using the same rocks and ravines that should have provided protection to mask their own movements. Technical Sergeant Williams, manning the 40 Bofors cannon, called out target designations with mechanical precision. Pilot, multiple personnel in the open, Grid 41, SMD 12,345, 67,890. Recommend 40 engagement. The weapon systems operator had been flying gunship missions for 8 years, and his voice carried the calm authority of someone who'd brought death from above to America's enemies across 3 different theaters of war. Negative on the 40, Banshee replied, studying the tactical display with the intensity of a surgeon examining X-rays. Friendlies are too close. We're going with the 25 Mike. The decision carried enormous risk. The smaller caliber weapon would require more precision, more time on target, and multiple passes to achieve the same effect as the larger guns. But it was the right choice, the safe choice, the choice that prioritized the lives of the men below over the expedient completion of her mission. Rivera pressed himself deeper into the rubble as enemy fire intensified around his position. Spooky, we need that fire support now. They're less than 50 meters out and closing fast. The desperation in his voice was carefully controlled but unmistakable. His team was running out of time, ammunition, and options. Above them, Banshee's hands moved across the controls with the fluid grace of a concert pianist, adjusting the aircraft's attitude and position with microcorrections that kept the AC-130 in perfect firing position. The gunship's orbit was a complex dance of physics and firepower, requiring constant adjustment to maintain the precise geometry that made accurate engagement possible. The night sky stretched endlessly above them, filled with stars that had witnessed countless battles throughout human history. But tonight, those ancient lights bore witness to something different, a moment when skill, courage, and determination would decide the fate of 6 men trapped in a valley that had become their potential tomb. "Guns ready," came the call from the weapons booth, waiting for pilot's command. The AC-130 had become a coiled spring, its deadly cargo of ammunition ready to rain down on the enemies below. All that remained was for Banshee to pull the trigger and unleash the storm that would either save the SEALs or become another tragic footnote in the long history of friendly fire incidents that haunted military aviation. The moment stretched like a held breath, pregnant with possibility and fraught with danger. In the space between one heartbeat and the next, Banshee made her choice. "Guns, guns, guns," she called out, her voice cutting through the radio static like a blade. The 25 Gatling gun came alive beneath the AC-130, spitting a stream of high-explosive rounds that streaked through the darkness like falling stars. Each round was precisely calculated, carefully aimed, perfectly placed to maximize damage to the enemy while minimizing risk to the friendlies below. The insurgents' advance faltered as the night erupted around them. What had been an organized assault became chaos as 25 rounds exploded among their ranks, sending shockwaves through their formation that shattered their coordination and confidence. Men who'd been advancing with the swagger of certain victory suddenly found themselves scrambling for cover as death rained down from the invisible guardian circling above. "Holy shit," Rivera breathed into his radio, watching through his scope as the enemy formation disintegrated under the precise fire from above. "Spooky, that was right on target. You just saved our asses." The relief in his voice was palpable, but it carried something else as well, a note of surprise that would have been insulting if Banshee hadn't heard it 1,000 times before. Rodriguez's voice came through the intercom from the sensor operator's position. "Pilot, I'm seeing secondary explosions in the target area. Looks like we hit something volatile." The infrared display showed blooming flowers of heat where the 25 rounds had found their mark, ammunition caches and weapon stores adding their own destructive energy to the carefully orchestrated barrage. "Roger sensor. Neptune 6, be advised you have secondary explosions in the target area. Recommend you hold position while we assess battle damage." Banshee's voice remained level, professional, giving no indication of the satisfaction she felt at watching her precisely placed rounds achieve maximum effect. This was what she'd trained for, what she'd fought for the right to do, and why she'd endured years of doubters and detractors. The AC-130 continued its orbit, a mechanical predator circling its prey with mechanical precision. The enemy's initial assault had been broken, their advance turned into a retreat, but Banshee knew the battle was far from over. Insurgents didn't give up easily, especially when they held terrain advantage and numerical superiority. This had been just the opening movement in what promised to be a long and deadly symphony. Spooky 77, this is Neptune 6. We're seeing more movement from the west. They're regrouping for another push. Rivera's voice carried a new note of confidence, the tone of a man who'd found hope in the darkness. But his tactical situation remained desperate, surrounded, outgunned, and dependent on the invisible angels circling overhead for their continued survival. Copy Neptune 6. I see them. Stand by. Banshee's response was economical, professional, but beneath the surface, her mind was already 3 moves ahead, anticipating the enemy's next action and preparing her response. The night was young, and the dance of death had only just begun. The insurgent commander crouched behind a boulder, his radio pressed against his ear as he listened to reports from his scattered fighters. The American aircraft had appeared without warning, turning their certain victory into bloody chaos in the space of minutes. But he was a veteran of many battles, a man who'd survived Soviet helicopters, Northern Alliance artillery, and American drones. One aircraft, no matter how well armed, wouldn't be enough to save the trapped Americans. All units fall back to secondary positions, he commanded in rapid Pashto. We wait for the aircraft to leave, then we finish this. His voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to command, but also the frustration of a leader whose carefully planned operation had been disrupted by an enemy he couldn't see or touch. The Americans had a saying, "You can't fight what you can't see," and tonight, that invisible enemy was proving devastatingly effective. But the commander had made a fundamental miscalculation. He assumed the AC-130 was a temporary threat, a guardian angel that would eventually have to return to base for fuel and ammunition. What he didn't understand was that the Ghost Rider carried enough firepower and fuel to maintain its deadly orbit for hours, and that the woman controlling its weapons had no intention of abandoning the men below. "Sir," called one of his lieutenants, pointing toward the eastern ridge where more heat signatures were moving into position. "The aircraft continues to circle. It's not leaving." The younger fighter's voice carried a note of uncertainty that threatened to spread through the ranks like a contagion. Fear was the enemy of tactical thinking, and already the commander could sense his men's confidence beginning to waver. High above the battlefield, Banshee made minute adjustments to her flight path, keeping the AC-130 in perfect position to engage any target that presented itself. The gunship's loiter capability was one of its greatest tactical advantages. While fast-moving jets had to make quick passes and then leave to refuel, the AC-130 could maintain continuous coverage of a battlefield for hours at a time. "Pilot, I'm tracking multiple heat signatures moving through the western approach," Rodriguez reported from his sensor station. "Looks like they're trying to establish a new firing position on the ridge." The targeting display showed at least 15 insurgents working their way up the rocky slope, their movement patterns suggesting a coordinated attempt to gain elevated firing positions overlooking the SEAL's defensive position. "I see them, Sensor. Neptune 6, be advised you have hostiles moving to elevated positions on your west side. They're trying to get the high ground." Banshee's tactical assessment was precise, professional, but Rivera could hear something else in her voice, a quality that suggested she understood not just what the enemy was doing, but why they were doing it and how to counter it. The night continued to unfold like a chess match played with bullets and blood, each side maneuvering for advantage, while the AC-130 maintained its patient vigil overhead. But already, something was becoming clear to everyone involved in the deadly game below. This wasn't just any pilot circling above them. This was someone special, someone whose skills were about to be demonstrated in the most unforgiving classroom possible. "All call signs, this is Overlord," came the voice from command. "Be advised, Spooky 77 is cleared for continuous engagement. Mission priority is protection of Neptune 6. The authorization carried the weight of command authority, but also an implicit recognition of what was unfolding in the darkness above Afghanistan. Someone at headquarters had made the decision to trust Thorne completely, to give her the freedom to fight the battle as she saw fit. Rodriguez's sensors painted a detailed picture of the insurgent regrouping effort, their heat signatures moving through the mountain terrain like ghosts in the infrared display. Pilot, I count 4 separate groups trying to establish firing positions. They're coordinating their movement, probably planning a simultaneous assault from multiple directions. His analysis was clinically accurate, but it also revealed the sophistication of the enemy they were facing. Copy sensor. They're good, but they're not that good. Banshee's response carried a note of grim appreciation for the tactical skills of their opponents, but also an absolute confidence in her ability to counter their strategy. She'd studied the insurgent playbook during her years of deployment, learning to think like her enemies in order to defeat them more effectively. The AC-130 adjusted its orbit slightly, bringing new angles of fire to bear on the developing threat. Banshee's hands moved across the controls with unconscious precision, making the thousands of tiny adjustments necessary to keep the massive aircraft in perfect position. The gunship was an extension of her will, a tool as familiar and responsive as her own body. Neptune 6, Spooky 7-7. I'm going to engage the Western group first, then work my way clockwise around your position. Keep your heads down and trust the process. Her words carried an authority that transcended rank or protocol. This was the voice of a pilot who knew exactly what she was doing, even if the men below had never heard her call sign before tonight. Rivera pressed his face against his rifle scope, watching the insurgent positions through the green glow of night vision. Copy, Spooky. We're ready for whatever you've got. His confidence was growing with each perfectly placed burst from above, but he still had no idea that the pilot saving his life was the same officer who'd been the subject of whispered conversations and skeptical glances throughout the air wing. The western ridge erupted in a string of explosions as the 25 cannon found its mark, each round precisely placed to maximize effect, while avoiding any possibility of collateral damage. The insurgents' carefully planned assault was being systematically dismantled by a pilot who understood that war wasn't just about firepower. It was about precision, patience, and the willingness to take calculated risks when the lives of friendly forces hung in the balance. Colonel Hartley watched the tactical display with growing amazement as Banshee systematically engaged each insurgent position in turn. Her target selection was flawless, her timing perfect, her accuracy surgical. But more than that, her tactical understanding of the battlefield was demonstrating a level of situational awareness that separated good pilots from truly exceptional ones. Jesus Christ, Lieutenant Morrison whispered, staring at the battle damage assessment reports flooding in from the sensors. She's not missing anything. Every burst is right on target. His voice carried the awe of someone witnessing expertise at the highest possible level, the kind of skill that couldn't be taught in any classroom or simulator. That's why she's up there, Lieutenant, Hartley replied, but his voice carried a note of vindication that went beyond simple professional pride. For months, he'd fought bureaucratic battles to keep Thorne in the cockpit, arguing against officers who questioned whether a woman could handle the psychological pressure of close air support missions. Tonight, she was providing her own answer to those questions. The radio crackled with Rivera's voice, tight with concentration as he coordinated his team's movements. Spooky, we're taking fire from a new position on the south wall. Looks like they've got a PKM set up in a fortified position. The enemy machine gun represented a significant threat. Its heavy rounds could pin down the SEAL team indefinitely, while other insurgent elements maneuvered for the killing blow. I see the PKM, Neptune 6. One moment. Banshee's response was calm, almost conversational, as if she were discussing something as mundane as the weather rather than life-and-death tactical problem. But her hands were already moving, adjusting the aircraft's position to bring the 40 Bofors cannon to bear on the machine gun nest. The night sky seemed to hold its breath as the AC-130 lined up for its next engagement. Somewhere in the darkness below, insurgent fighters were learning that their carefully planned ambush had become a trap of their own making. They'd thought they were hunting American soldiers, but instead, they'd awakened something far more dangerous, a guardian angel with teeth, piloted by a woman who'd spent her entire career proving that she belonged exactly where she was. The 40 cannon spoke with a voice like rolling thunder, its high-explosive rounds walking across the enemy position with devastating precision. Each shot was a masterpiece of applied mathematics, trajectory and timing, combining to deliver destruction exactly where it was needed most. The PKM fell silent, its crew eliminated by rounds that had been placed with surgical accuracy despite the darkness and distance. Staff Sergeant Rivera felt the pressure around his position ease as the enemy machine gun was silenced. Through his night vision scope, he watched insurgent fighters breaking from cover, their coordinated assault dissolving into individual acts of desperation and survival. The mysterious pilot circling overhead was systematically dismantling their entire tactical plan, turning their advantages into liabilities with each precisely placed burst of fire. "Outstanding shooting, Spooky," Rivera called into his radio, genuine admiration coloring his voice. "You're keeping us alive down here." He'd worked with AC-130 crews before, but this level of precision was something special, something that went beyond standard close air support doctrine. This pilot understood not just how to shoot, but when to shoot, and perhaps more importantly, when not to shoot. In the weapons booth behind Banshee, Technical Sergeant Williams called out new target information with the steady rhythm of a man completely comfortable with his deadly profession. "Pilot, I'm tracking another group moving toward the north wall. Looks like they're carrying RPGs." The threat assessment was clinical, professional, but everyone aboard the aircraft understood the implications. Rocket-propelled grenades could turn the SEAL's defensive position into a death trap in seconds. "Copy, weapons. Engaging with 25. Banshee's response was immediate, instinctive, born from years of training and months of operational experience. The AC-130 banked slightly, bringing the Gatling gun to bear on the new threat with mechanical precision. But this engagement would be different. The RPG team was closer to the friendlies, operating in the gray zone where precision became a matter of life and death. The insurgents below had no way of knowing that their every movement was being tracked by sensors that could distinguish between a rifle and a rocket launcher from thousands of feet above. They moved with the confidence of hunters closing in for the kill, unaware that they'd become the hunted in a game where the rules had suddenly and dramatically changed. Neptune 6, heads down. Danger close engagement coming your way. Banshee's warning carried the weight of absolute authority, the voice of someone who knew exactly what she was about to do and trusted her team to execute with flawless precision. The words "danger close" carried special meaning in military aviation. They indicated that friendly forces were close enough to the target that even a slight miscalculation could result in friendly casualties. The 25 cannon erupted in a controlled burst that lasted exactly 3 seconds but felt like an eternity. Each round followed a trajectory calculated to the millimeter, crossing the space between aircraft and target with the inevitability of gravity itself. The RPG team vanished in a series of explosions that lit up the night like deadly fireworks, their weapons destroyed before they could be brought to bear on the trapped Americans below. The radio waves carried Rivera's voice, thick with emotion and something approaching reverence. "Spooky 77, that was incredible. Dead on target, no friendly casualties. Whoever you are up there, you just earned a case of beer." His words carried the highest compliment one warrior could give another, acknowledgement of skill demonstrated under fire, competence proven in the crucible where mistakes were measured in lives lost rather than points deducted. But Rivera still had no idea that the pilot saving his life was Major Kaylin Thorne, the woman whose career had nearly been ended by accusations of recklessness, whose every mission was scrutinized for signs of the imagined weaknesses that existed only in the minds of those who'd never shared a cockpit with her. Tonight, those accusations were being answered not with words, but with the precise application of controlled violence that was the hallmark of true professional competence. High above the valley, Banshee continued her deadly orbit, her eyes scanning the tactical displays for signs of the next threat. The battle was evolving, flowing like water through the mountainous terrain, and she had to stay ahead of every development if she wanted to bring the SEALs home alive. The night was far from over, and the insurgents below were learning that sometimes the hunted became the hunters with nothing more than a radio call and the intervention of someone they'd never see but would never forget. The infrared display told a story of devastation and tactical collapse as the insurgent assault crumbled under Banshee's methodical application of firepower. What had begun as a coordinated attack by experienced fighters was devolving into scattered pockets of resistance, their command structure disrupted, and their morale shattered by the invisible death that circled overhead like a mechanical vulture. "Sensor, give me a count on remaining hostiles," Banshee called to Rodriguez, her voice maintaining the same professional calm that had characterized her performance throughout the engagement. But beneath that surface composure, her mind was already analyzing the next phase of the battle, anticipating how the enemy would adapt to their changed circumstances. "I count 15 personnel scattered across 3 separate positions," Rodriguez replied, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a job well done. "Primary threat appears to be neutralized, but they're still armed and dangerous." The sensor operator's assessment was thorough, professional, but it also revealed the tactical reality that Banshee had achieved in less than 10 minutes of engagement. She'd broken the back of an insurgent force that had held tactical advantage through superior numbers and defensive positioning. Rivera's voice crackled through the radio with renewed confidence. "Spooky 7-7, we're seeing scattered individuals falling back to defensive positions. Looks like you broke their assault." The SEAL team leader's tactical assessment matched the view from above, but his tone carried something new, a note of respect that hadn't been present in his earlier transmissions. The insurgent commander pressed himself against a rock outcropping, his radio silent as he watched his carefully planned operation collapse around him. The American aircraft had appeared without warning and engaged with a level of precision that suggested intimate knowledge of insurgent tactics and terrain. His fighters were scattered, demoralized, and pinned down by an enemy they couldn't see or effectively engage. "All units withdraw to fallback positions," he commanded, his voice carrying the bitter taste of tactical defeat. The Americans below were no longer trapped prey. They'd become bait in a trap that had snared his own forces instead. The commander had fought many battles, but he'd never faced an opponent who combined such overwhelming firepower with surgical precision. Technical Sergeant Williams monitored the weapon systems with the steady concentration of a master craftsman tending his tools. "Pilot, all weapons green and ready. We've got plenty of ammunition for extended engagement if necessary." His report was routine, professional, but it carried an undertone of satisfaction that came from working with a pilot who knew how to use their devastating capabilities effectively. "Copy, weapons. Neptune 6, what's your assessment of enemy capability?" Banshee's question demonstrated the tactical thinking that separated competent pilots from exceptional ones. She wasn't content with breaking the immediate assault. She wanted to understand the enemy's remaining capacity for organized resistance. Rivera took a moment to assess his team's situation before responding. "Spooky, enemy appears to be in full retreat. We're no longer taking organized fire, just scattered shots from defensive positions." His voice carried relief, but also the professional wariness of a soldier who knew that battles could turn on a moment's notice. The AC-130 continued its orbit, maintaining overwatch as the tactical situation stabilized below. But Banshee knew that this apparent victory was only the beginning of a longer story. The insurgents hadn't been destroyed, they'd been dispersed, driven back to positions where they could regroup and potentially threaten other coalition forces. Her mission wasn't complete until those threats were permanently neutralized. "Overlord, this is Spooky 7-7, she called to the command center, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who just demonstrated exactly why she deserved to be in the cockpit of America's most powerful close air support platform. Target area is secured. Neptune 6 is no longer under immediate threat. The response from Overlord came immediately, Colonel Hartley's voice unmistakable despite the radio static. Outstanding work, Spooky 77. Neptune 6, prepare for extraction. Guardian Angel is inbound to your location. The extraction helicopter was still 20 minutes away, but the immediate crisis had passed, transformed by the intervention of a pilot who turned certain defeat into tactical victory. In the Tactical Operations Center, Lieutenant Morrison stared at the battle damage assessment with something approaching awe. Colonel, she neutralized over half the insurgent force without a single friendly casualty. That's remarkable shooting. His voice carried the wonder of someone witnessing expertise at its highest level, skill applied with the kind of precision that textbooks could describe but few could execute. That's why she's Major Thorne, Lieutenant, Hartley replied, his voice carrying years of vindication and professional pride. Some people are born to fly desks, others are born to fly gunships. Tonight, everyone gets to see the difference. His words carried weight beyond their immediate meaning. This was validation not just of one pilot's abilities, but of the decisions that had put her in position to save lives when it mattered most. The night sky above Afghanistan had witnessed countless battles, but tonight would be remembered differently. Tonight, a woman who'd been overlooked, underestimated, and written off by much of the military establishment had demonstrated why competence transcended gender, why skill mattered more than prejudice, and why the right person in the right place at the right time could change the course of history, one perfectly placed round at a time. Below, Rivera gathered his team for the extraction, but his mind was already processing what he'd witnessed. Someone named Spooky,